I move that House File 4100 be recommended to be re-referred to the Jobs and Economic Development Finance Division. I see no amendments, so Chair Mahoney, tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. This is a bill that I'm doing because I have two daughters. And women in this world get 20%, or I'm sorry, 80%, paid 80% of what a man gets paid. It's absolutely ridiculous when they're doing the same amount of work. You all know that I'm a pipe fitter. If a woman is working with me on a job site, she gets the same amount of money, same benefits, same everything. That's the way it should always be. If they're doing the same work, there should not be any pay gap. And one of the reasons that pay gap exists is that the HR or the hiring person can ask without any problems, how much did you make at your old job? And if you don't answer, you're not going to get the job. Or if you do answer, you're likely to get 20, 30% less. Totally unfair, particularly in this world where we have, unfortunately, we have a lot of single mothers that are not getting any other support. They need the same that us old white guys get. So with that, that's what this bill does. It requires the, I could go into it a lot. I probably would be better off letting, after my last committee, I'd be better off allowing the, my testifiers to take over from here.
Excellent. Thank you. Welcome to the committee. Commissioner, are you going to go first, or how are we going to do this?
Chairman Lesh and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me. My name is Jill Hasday. I'm a distinguished McKnight University professor and the Centennial Professor of Law at the University of Minnesota Law School. I teach sex discrimination law and constitutional law, among other subjects. In my time today, I would like to make one simple but fundamental point. Asking about pay history perpetuates pay discrimination. I'll start with some historical background before describing the current state of the law. Before 1963, it was perfectly legal for employers to pay women less. This type of discrimination was pervasive and out in the open. Newspaper help wanted ads would list one salary available to men and a lower salary available to women doing the same work. Many hoped that the Federal Equal Pay Act of 1963 would end pay discrimination between men and women. But 57 years after the law's enactment, an enormous wage differential persists. The median earnings for a woman working full-time and year-round in 2018 were just 81.6% of the median earnings for a male worker working full-time and year-round. The latest studies estimate that America's wage gap will not close for white women until 2055, for black women until 2130, and for Hispanic women until 2224. One important reason for this persistent wage gap is that employers frequently ask job applicants about their pay history before deciding what salary to offer. This widespread practice means that workers often cannot escape pay discrimination by seeking a new job. If a woman is paid less at one company, perhaps because her boss simply assumes that women deserve less, the consequences can reverberate for a lifetime. Discrimination early in a career can lock someone into a permanent cycle of unequal pay. Unfortunately, federal law does not prohibit employers from asking job applicants about their pay history. Indeed, federal law accepts, even encourages the practice. Employers sued under the Federal Equal Pay Act for paying women less will commonly defend their unequal pay practices by contending that they set salaries relying on each job applicant's pay history. The United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit, which covers Minnesota, has accepted this argument, holding that it does not violate federal law for an employer to pay women less if the employer determined pay scales by relying on pay history. I'll repeat that because it's important. Federal law does not stop employers from paying women less for doing the same job as a male employee, so long as the employer can point to pay history as the basis for the discrimination. The ability to rely on pay history provides employers with a ready-made excuse for underpaying women, but efforts to amend federal law to prohibit employers from asking about job history have so far been unsuccessful. A growing number of states and localities have responded to this problem by enacting their own laws that bar employers from asking job applicants about pay history. These laws are aimed at ending the cycle of pay discrimination so that everyone can receive equal pay for equal work. The laws benefit women and anyone else with a history of being underpaid. To date, approximately 18 states and 21 localities have prohibited employers from asking job applicants about pay history. Minnesota should join this reform movement. Every Minnesotan deserves equal pay for equal work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Hasday. Commissioner, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Rebecca Lucero, and I'm the Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. I'm excited to speak with you today about this bill, House File 4100, which would ensure that employees are paid based on their experience, based on their skill, their track record, and responsibilities of the position, not on their salary history. When an employer makes salary decisions based on someone's salary history, it can continue the never-ending cycle of pay inequalities for women. Inequalities in pay perpetuate when further salaries are anchored to past salaries. That's why House File 4100 is an important step to closing the ever-persistent pay gap so that all Minnesotans can thrive. So these pay gaps are persistent and historical, as Professor Hasday talked about. A woman is so regularly paid less than a man with similar experience, qualifications, and seniority for the same job that we're compelled to ask, what practices or policies are perpetuating inequality in pay, resulting in this discriminatory outcome, even if there's no discriminatory intent? The pay gap is also so disparate. In 2018, women in Minnesota still earn approximately 80 cents to every dollar a man makes. For women of color, as was noted, that pay gap is substantially worse. Asian women earning 71 cents to the dollar, Black women earning 58 cents to the dollar, Native women 56 cents to the dollar, and Latinas 52 cents to every dollar a man makes. Given this, we are again compelled to ask what practices or procedures are perpetuating inequality in pay, resulting in this discriminatory outcome. So while there are many reasons for the pay gap, relying on an applicant's previous pay when setting the salary for a new job is one of these practices that often causes an inequality in pay by following women from job to job. That's why the pay history bill is so important. The pay history bill makes it clear that Minnesotans should be paid based on their experience, skills, track record, and responsibilities of the position. It would prohibit an employer from inquiring into, considering, or requiring the disclosure of one's salary history through the hiring and promotion process. When Minnesota passes this bill, it will be an important and proactive step in closing the pay gap. Minnesota will also join a groundswell of 18 states, including Missouri, Alabama, and North Carolina, that have already passed statutes to end pay history questions. As the state's civil rights enforcement agency, we're committed to ending discrimination so that every Minnesotan can live lives full of dignity and joy. I really look forward to working with all of you to move this forward. Be happy to answer any questions.
It's a great vote. It's a great bill. You should vote for it.
Any other testifiers from the public who wish to be heard on House File 4100? I don't see any hands going up the audience, but we have a question from Representative Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Professor and Chair Mahoney. I just really wanted to thank you for bringing this bill forward so that we can finally catch up to Alabama and equitable measures in our law. You know, low pay, as you mentioned, Professor, low pay at someone's last job under this current practice means that they're going to be paid low at their next job and at the job after that, and ends up propagating a cycle of not only underpayment but undervaluing in the marketplace. In anticipation of this bill hearing, I was just doing a little bit of research into kind of the history of asking for folks to disclose, or asking for prospective employees to disclose salary. It's meant to determine someone's market value. And I think that is unfortunate because women, people of color, people with disabilities have been dramatically undervalued in our society as it is, and this is just one more way in which that devaluing rather is being propagated currently in our employment law. So I think in the interest of not only equity and prosperity, but in the interest of fairness, we need to pass this bill, and we needed to pass it yesterday. But let's go catch up to Alabama. Thank you, Chair Mahoney. Thank you, Chair Lesh.
Chair Constant.
Thank you, Chair Lesh. Were you able to identify other practices besides this that contribute to the pay gap? And if so, what were they?
Professor Hasday.
Thank you. The pay gap is an enormous problem, and I think many different strategies will have to be used. This is just one of them. For instance, courts, in my view, aren't vigilantly enforcing existing statutory prohibitions on employment discrimination. They're often reluctant to acknowledge evidence of outright bias. But I think this statute is one important step. It's not the only one, but it's an important step.
Thank you, Professor Hasday. Seeing no other comments from the, oh yeah, Representative Herr.
Thank you, Chair Lesh, and thank you, Representative Mahoney, for bringing this bill forward. It was really interesting. So I don't know how many people know this, but I've been working on a doctorate for way too long, and part of my dissertation that I'm working on is really looking at women, specifically Southeast Asian women's, their corporate climb and the barriers that they face and the pay that they have. And I just wanted to point out that I completely agree with everything you all are saying, and I just wanted to add that for women to actually make, like Asian women in some categories, make the same as white men, but they have to have way more education and way more experience to get paid the same as a white man. And so this disparity carries on even after women get experience, after women have way more education, and that we continue to see this. And so this is just a small first step that we need to take in order to then look at all of the other disparities and how we can fix those as well. And I think that there will be ripple effects. So I appreciate this bill, and I think it's wonderful, and I hope that everyone supports it.
Chair Mahoney.
To Representative Herr, it's not just Asian women, it is all women that have to have more education and more experience and more and more and more. And that's not fair. The only place you don't find that is in the building trades.
Just a quick follow-up that, it's just, I was just referring to my particular dissertation, and so I just wanted to make sure I'm not making statements for all categories of women, just what my research told me about Southeast Asian women.
I'll move that House File 4100. Oh, what?
I had a question.
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, and I don't know to which testifier this goes to, but on the top of page 2, starting with 2.1 through 2.6, in my reading of that, I'm a little bit confused as to whether this language prohibits an employer from offering the same or a lower salary if the applicant offers their past pay history voluntarily.
Commissioner Lucero.
Chair Lesh, Representative Scott, thank you for this question. I find this to be a little bit confusing as well, and I think this is an area where I'd love to work with you offline to clarify this a little bit. Certainly, the intention is to end pay discrimination, and so we want to make sure that that's really clear to get towards that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so is the intention of the law to require, if the information is, past pay information is volunteered by the applicant, is the intent of the law to require the employer to pay at least what they were making before and or more? Is that the intent of the law?
Chair Lesh, Representative Scott, thank you. No, that is not the intent of the law. This is really intended to be able to say to employers, look, there's a lot of ways that you might know somebody's salary. For instance, us public employers, our salaries are public. My salary was published in the Pioneer Press when I was appointed. And so if somebody knows about what my pay is, people know things. They also know my sex. They might know that I'm Chicana. They might know things about me, but it's there to say that that can't be the reason for making the decision. And so it's actually there to protect employers.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, Chair Scott.
Thank you. Just another question. On line 2.10, it lists there that there's a prohibition against discriminating based on membership or activity in a local commission. And I wondered what you had in mind there. Is that new language? Is that elsewhere in the human rights statute?
Commissioner Lucero?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's directly from the Human Rights Statute, and I can find where that is and point it to you following this.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to know more specifically what that means.
Sure.
And then, I'm trying to find it, I read it last night, but I thought it was saying that, like, when the pay is public, like with a state employee or whatever, the information can be found in public records. I think it must be on page 1 towards, I don't know, somewhere between 116 and 121.
Yep.
But I didn't see any information there about counties or local cities, because a lot of times their employees' pay information is also public, and it didn't seem like that was included in the language. Maybe I'm remembering that wrong from last night reading it, but it's not just state employees or federal employees where their pay information is public. It's beyond that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Johnson?
Chair Lesh, Representative Mahoney, I was actually talking to a couple friends of mine last night. Both are women, and they actually have a problem with this bill, because when they were asked about their wage, when they were applying for a new job, they told them, granted they were looking for a work closer to home instead of driving down to the metro all the time. They actually told them their wage when they were asked. They ended up getting more money because they wanted them to work there. So if they went to ask their wage, they would have got paid less. So it works both ways, so we got to be careful to make sure we don't make things go backwards as well.
Representative Cantrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to request roll call on this.
Roll call's been requested. Representative Robbins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chair Mahoney. Nice to see you. So I'm very sympathetic to what you're trying to do. As a woman in different phases of my career, I have had more education and more experience and been paid less than my predecessor, so I know this is a real thing. But there are also points in my career where, because I chose to step out of the workforce for 10 years and was probably less productive at the time when computers were getting online and I was a little behind the technology curve, I was less productive and I went back to work. I needed time to catch up. So I think there's a lot of variables in what goes into salary, and I appreciate, Commissioner, that you referenced that about experience and level of training and productivity. Productivity is the main driver of wages, and I just think we have to keep that in mind. So with that in mind, I would like to just question about the strength of this and what the penalty is. So in line 1.11, it says that the employer cannot even consider from any source pay history. And then if they do that, it's an unfair discriminatory employment practice. This is line 116 under section 36A, blah, blah, blah. Forgive the blah, blah, blahs. So just, I'm wondering if you can't even consider pay history from any source. Like you said, yours is public. Like people, there's stuff in the ether you just know. And if the test is you can't consider that, that seems very onerous if there is a penalty. So could you address that, and could you address what the penalty is, please?
Well, I could have Professor Hasday answer that, because you spoke to that a little bit in terms of the litigation reasons for this.
Okay, I have thanks for your question. I think, a two-part answer. First, even controlling for factors like productivity, the wage gap remains largely unexplained. So one economic study controlled for race, region, unionization, education, occupation, work experience, 38% of the wage gap remained. So it's not an adequate account, all these other factors, though obviously that's something. The second thing is a bill to stop employers from asking about job history just does that, no more, no less. Employers would remain free to set pay scales according to the level of education required, the time commitment, the scarcity of the skills. In other words, there's still going to be people paid less and people paid more. It's just that it wouldn't be based on pay history. It would have to be based on the job itself rather than someone locked into a cycle of being consistently underpaid.
Okay. Representative Robbins?
Mr. Chair, thank you. And I agree with that, maybe not asking directly, but the fact that they cannot consider information that's out there just seems a little bit of a stretch too far for me.
Commissioner Lucero?
Chair Lesh, thank you for that. So there's a lot of things that an employer knows about somebody that they are not, or are prohibited from asking about. So you, again, might know that I'm a woman. You might know that I'm a woman of color. You might know that I might be a pregnancy-bearing age. These are all factors that we have said, hey, we don't want employers to be considering these because this is adding to discriminatory outcomes. And so if somebody knows something, that's fine. You know all these things about me. It's what are you actually basing your decisions on? And employers can base their decisions on all sorts of factors that are around the job itself and not around who I am as a person or the cycles of discrimination that have persisted before me.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions before the committee, then, I don't see her, do you see her? Okay. Then, motion before the committee is to move House File 4100 to be re-referred to the Jobs and Economic Development Finance Division. All in favor signify by, oh yeah, roll call's been requested. Chair votes aye.
Representative Moeller.
Yes.
Representative Scott.
Aye with reservation.
Representative Albright. Representative Barr.
No.
Representative Cantrell.
Yes.
Representative Carlson.
Yes.
Representative Considine.
Yes.
Representative Hassan.
Yes.
Representative Herr.
Yes.
Representative Johnson. Representative Liebling.
Yes.
Representative Lucero.
No.
Representative Mariani. Representative Noor.
Yes.
Representative O'Neill. Representative Robbins. Representative
Yes,
Zhang.
yes, but I look forward to seeing it in jobs.
Representative Zhang.
Yes.
Representative Albright.
Yes.
Representative Johnson.
Yes, with reservations.
Got 14 ayes, 2 nays, and a handful of ayes with reservations. I don't know how to count those, but the motion passes. The bill is referred to Jobs and Economic Development Finance Division.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members.
Thank you.